In this video, I'm going to deliberately de-pedestal myself, and the purpose of that is several-fold. First of all, in my own experience with mentors, with lovers, with whatever, spiritual teachers, with parents, is that none of them are perfect. However, it tends to sell books or workshops or CDs to pretend, for the audience, for the client to pretend, and for the teacher or presenter or guru or whatever to allow the projection of some form of verticality, that someone is wiser, smarter, you name it, and therefore more valuable to listen to. Now, the truth is a lot more nuanced. And one of the things that I've noticed throughout my life is that a relatively small minority of people, let's say 10% or so, tends to pay me a lot of compliments and elevate me. Then there's a noticeable percentage of people that tend to deflate or dissociate. And they do it for different reasons. The people that tend to elevate me or put me on some kind of a pedestal, or and certainly to pay me some very nice compliments, tend to be growth-oriented, relatively intelligent, perhaps well-educated in metaphysics and spirituality and mental and philosophical pursuits, and comfortable in their own skin, comfortable with or espousing and aspiring to some sense of authenticity and divergence from the norm. Then the group that tends to kind of feel a bit uneasy and knock me down, perhaps even, as, to well below a pedestal, is the group that tends to be more referential of the main or dominant cult or culture. And what shows up on their radar is that this person is different. And that's all you need to know in order to be uncomfortable if one is trying to belong to the dominant memes, the dominant cult and cultural architectures. So one group is valuing the thing that is making the other group uneasy. And it's been interesting, at times confusing, trying to sort out why it is that this group of people thinks so highly of me, and this group of people either thinks so poorly of me or certainly is, very uncomfortable associating with me. What does that mean? Because although these groups are not always in the same room, I'm getting these dual bits of feedback. And what I've made of this, what I make of this, is that the very things that are beneficial or admired by one group are the very things that are uncomfortable or problematic to another group. In other words, it's not so much about the person or the policy or protocol. It's about the perspective from which it's viewed. And it kind of makes sense that anything can be viewed from a mixed perspective, from all different angles. And if you think of something like speed, in a hyper-efficient cult, speed is considered, a pinnacle of of value to get something done faster, and then faster still. If you're in a capitalist framework, then if you can make one car in a day and then bring that down to one car a minute, you've made great progress and you're getting efficiencies of scale. However, if you're meditating and you're trying to ground and integrate and be present in your body, then going from, a 1 hour meditation to a 1 minute meditation is considered backsliding. That you're not aware, you're not as patient, you're not as present. And similarly, if you're wanting to connect with the humanity, with the essence of another human being, and they walk briskly past you texting on their phone, this is a dissatisfying and unsavory person who doesn't know how to smell the roses. At the same time, if you're a business person trying to get as much done as possible and you walk by someone smelling the roses, they are a slacker, and so a lot of this is about perspective. And the other complicating piece about, this polarity of from one perspective strength and from another perspective weakness is the way that strengths often come about. For example, one of the most frequent comments that I receive in Western cultures, meaning this doesn't happen to me when I'm in Thailand, for example. In fact, the complete opposite does. But in Western cultures, I am complimented for being highly articulate, for being confident in my articulation, and also being able to put complex things, difficult things into words to say them well, whatever you call that. And in Thailand, that's reduced to, why you talk so much? Smile, relax, no problem, might be like ka. We don't need to go into all these details. So strength in one culture, puzzling levels of unnecessary seriousness in another culture. Well, it just so happens that if we look at Thai culture through the lens of intelligence and measure the efficiency with which sustainable feelings of well-being are generated, the Thais are correct. You should all stop watching these videos immediately. Go out, smile to your neighbors, be polite to your friends, laugh, do something playful, and your well-being will go up, statistically speaking. I'm happier just thinking of my time in Thailand. Now, over in the West, where mental activity has been elevated due to its association with masculinity, because in the male-female, truly masculine and feminine, in the masculine and feminine polarity, in the yang-yin polarity, thought, the structuring energy is more masculine, and feeling, that which flows through the thought and responds to the thought, is more feminine. And the West has been highly chauvinistic, not just in the bias against women in favor of men, but in the bias that downplays the value of feminine energy and the feminine principle and elevates the masculine principle. The West has been biased towards masculine energy for thousands of years. And one of the ways this shows up is in the bias of elevating great thought and ignoring or downplaying great feeling. You might get, in music, in symphony, etc., the feeling, or in opera perhaps. But even in that area, there's a tremendous focus on structure and technique, and skill, the skill at which emotion was evoked. And so it's natural for, the expression of interesting. Oh, that's so interesting. Not that's so engaging, that's so emotional, to predominate. And, this is a blind spot within the cult. And the evidence of that blind spot is the majority of intellectuals going to Thailand and experiencing the incredible courtesy and warmth and presence. I mean, it just floors me every single time I arrive in one of my favorite hotels upon landing in Bangkok. And I haven't been there in years. And there will be 3 or 4 staff members who greet me by name, who remember our interactions thousands of guests later, years later, because that's important in a relational and emotional-based cult. It's important to let the other person know that they matter. And so the Thais do this better than any cult or group I found anywhere in the world. That's not to say there might not be some superior cults in that dimension, but I mean, to me, I'm treated better as a relative stranger in Thailand than I am in my own town. And, that's a phenomenal achievement for any cult or culture. So, same talent, same bias, different perspectives. Now it gets deeper than that, because one of the reasons that I lean so heavily towards mental articulation is the sustained pattern of emotional dissociation with both parents, and my attempts to appease and connect with a father that was frightened of his feelings, that was very comfortable in thought as long as it didn't get too personal. And so the profound separation from both parents emotionally, and looking for some way to form a secure emotional attachment, drove me to dissociate from my feelings and develop Asperger's type tendencies, and elevate the things that made my father and mother comfortable. Meaning my mother was also very uncomfortable in her body, in her feelings. And a child needs to form some form of secure relationship. So if both parents are committed to avoiding their feelings, and one of them is highly articulate, it shunts the development of half of the self to meet that situation, to respond to the dis-ease, meaning there's an imbalance within the family system. But when there's an imbalance in both parents who are frightened of and pushing away feelings and enjoying the distraction of philosophy, well, it induces the same dis-ease in the children, because the child is programmed to connect where the parent is, where the parent feels good. And that's in one part of the psyche. And so, you can see not only are there different perspectives on, the ability to think, which ties directly into the ability to be aware of consciousness, because human consciousness is predicated on language. But we see that why were both parents in one family system so obsessed with avoiding their feelings? Why was the cult at large so uncomfortable with the depth of emotion? And we see that when two parents from two family systems are highly traumatized and traumatically illiterate and highly motivated to avoid re-triggering and reliving those traumas, and highly motivated to distract from those fears, those deep childhood wounds, that the strategy is to escape, in a sense, through thoughts. And so we see that a highly traumatic childhood with different levels of complex PTSD in both parents leads to a coping strategy that rewards them in a chauvinistic cult for dissociating from their feelings and elevating their ideas and accomplishments, which then leads them to pass on that meme to their children, to reward the child from dissociating from their feelings. So we can see that whatever this is a complex response to an imbalanced, emotionally illiterate cult. And so, what is it? How does it feel? What do we make of these strengths that emerge so strongly in some individuals and less so in others? In many cases, they are an adaptive response to an imbalanced environment, or a counterbalance, a rebellion, which we can also see in this pattern of looking deeply at the equations of well-being. Because since the first time I felt suicidal at age 14 to the present day, there have been aspects of my physiological experience, of my mental and emotional experience in extraordinary suffering. Now that takes a variety of different forms, but when it's regularly presented to my mind and body that I'm in more pain than well-being, that there's reason to suspect that I might be happier out of this body than in this body, then adjusting to the status quo, adjusting to the cult that induced those sensations is not intelligent. And so, this very passion to explore new cults, new cultures, to learn the science of well-being, to take time to develop these thoughts, emerges directly out of high concentrations of suffering. And so I think that the best way to look at so much of these words and this project and this material is that individuals such as myself that are induced into unusual concentrations of imbalance, asymmetry, and dis-ease are more motivated than average to find the workarounds, to put it into language, to do something different than the status quo. And so high states of fucked upness, high states of pain, can be counterbalanced by high states of genius, by high states of development in highly motivated responses. And so, if you look carefully at the lives of so many high achieving performers in any field, there tends to be these counterbalance dynamics where an extreme feeling of smallness led someone to seek office in one of the highest stations in the land, because that bigness was necessary to medicate that feeling of valuelessness. Where extreme powerlessness tends to, for example, sexually abused boys. A number of the young men who were abused by priests became bodybuilders, and a number of people that were afraid of their homosexuality became hypermasculine and put forth this image of machismo. So the fact that I'm spending so much time in this domain is a normal, healthy response to extreme suffering. It does not mean that I'm better than in any sense of innate value. It does not mean that I have all the answers. What it means is that I'm unusually driven to mitigate levels of pain, levels of loneliness, levels of physical trauma that demand an answer, and which lead me, among other things, to start and be a part of this project.